Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to start off with welcomes by Senator Krueger and Senator Harckham. Senator Krueger, please kick us off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Hi, I'm Liz Krueger, and I'm joined by my colleague, Senator Pete Harckham, and we're delighted that you have joined us for really the second round of a series of presentations about how important it is to understand what is going on, both with the climate action changes in the New York State budget, but more importantly, the role of the fossil fuel industry in effectively fighting back with all that they have against sensible science-based climate action. They've hired an enormous number of lobbyists, and they come at all legislators constantly, frankly, with false information. So we thought it was crucially important, now that we have this chance to take a deep breath after the budget, as we move into actual freestanding environmental legislation over the next few weeks, that we all have a chance to hear from really truly important experts about what is real and what is false that we will be hearing. So I'm glad to see so many of our colleagues and their staffs able to join us today. And that's my big role, and I'm going to turn it over to Pete Harckham, the environmental chair of the New York State Senate.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for organizing this today and for all of your activism on these issues and your leadership. I want to thank all of the other sponsors today. It's really important that we're here. As Liz said, there's a concerted effort. We saw it first with the change to undermine the climate accounting from the CLCPA. We see it in the movement to vilify gas. We're going to take their gas stoves away. We're going to drive up the cost of commerce. So we see the talking points, and we know it's coming. And that's why it's so important that we have two premier experts in this field to give us fact-based and evidence-based information to counter these claims, which will be so important as we move forward, not just this year, but into the future. So with that, I want to welcome everybody again, and let me introduce today's two panelists. For anybody who's been around the environmental movement for any amount of time, will know our first panelist, Bill McKibben. Bill is an internationally known and respected author, journalist, and climate justice leader. His 1989 book, The End of Nature, was regarded as the first book for a general audience about climate change. It's been published in 24 languages. He's written 20 other books, and his work appears regularly in periodicals from The New Yorker to Rolling Stone. Bill founded 350.org, the first global grassroots climate campaign, and more recently founded Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate and justice. We welcome Bill McKibben. Our second speaker, Dr. Anshul Gupta. Dr. Gupta is someone I've gotten to know very closely over the last couple of the years in my district. I count him as a friend and now a trusted advisor on climate issues. Dr. Gupta was a scientist at IBM T.J. Watson Research Center. Alarmed by the slow government response to the rapidly worsening climate crisis, he took early retirement last month and joined New Yorkers for Clean Power as a senior policy analyst. At IBM, his research focused on high-performance computing and recently included energy, materials, and decarbonization, in which he has had multiple publications as well and 2 pending patents. He also volunteers on the leadership team of the New York chapter's Coalition of Climate Reality Project. And with that, I will turn it over to Mark Weiss, another good friend and great leader and activist, one of the activists of New York Renews in 2015, and is now a member of the Coalition Steering Committee. Mark?
Thanks very much, Senator Harckham, and thank you, Senator Krueger, both of you for co-sponsoring this. So we're going to get into it pretty quickly. We're going to begin with a presentation from Bill McKibben and continue with a presentation from Anshul, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Feel free to post your questions at any time as the presentations are being made, and we'll try and get as many questions in as we can. Thanks again to everybody who's joining us this morning. As both senators have said, this is a kind of a critical moment to take a look at what the fossil fuel industry has been doing to try and stop climate action in New York State. New York State has been a leader, and we need to continue to be a leader. But I'm sure all of you at legislative offices have been getting phone calls and emails and other contacts by constituents who have been driven by messaging from some of the fossil fuel interests in the state. So you're pretty familiar with, you're at the receiving end of some of the work they're doing. Today, we're going to hear about, first, Bill is going to talk about what the industry has done nationally, historically, and what they're doing currently. And then Anshul is going to focus in on some of those same, who the players are in New York State. So let's please, just to mention that we are emphasizing questions by legislators and legislative staff. Others can certainly ask questions, but we'll prioritize those from legislators and staff. So Bill, would you please kick it off? Thank you.
Indeed, Mark, I would. A pleasure to join you all, and a great pleasure to see Senators Harckham and Krueger. Many thanks for long-standing efforts here. I'm going to talk for just a little while because Anshul has the more pressing data about what's actually happening in the Empire State. But let me give the backdrop to it for a few minutes. The notion that the fossil fuel industry is spreading disinformation is not new in any way. In fact, it turns out in certain ways to be the most significant part of the entire climate story, except for the climate science. And the two stories unfold almost simultaneously. We now know from great investigative reporting at places like Inside Climate News, the Pulitzer Prize-winning website, the Los Angeles Times, the Columbia Journalism School, that the fossil fuel industry knew everything there was to know about climate change back in the 1980s. Back when I was writing the first book about all this, back when Jim Hansen at NASA working at 110th Street and Broadway was doing the crucial data gathering, so were people at places like Exxon. At that time, Exxon was the biggest company in the world. They had a great staff of scientists. Their product was carbon. Of course, they were going to find out what was going on, and they did. As early as the mid-1980s, and new data about this comes out almost every month, their scientists were telling their executives precisely what the temperature was going to be in 2020. And they were spot on. They knew what was going to happen. More to the point, they were believed by their executives. Exxon began building all its drilling rigs higher to compensate for the rise in sea level that they knew was in the offing. The one thing they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, we now know, beginning in about 1990, across the industry, they joined together to set up a series of kind of front groups that built this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that continues to this day. They hired many of the people who used to work for the tobacco industry, and off they went on their merry way. By 1997, the CEO of Exxon was telling the World Petroleum Congress that the planet was cooling and that it would make no difference if we took actions now or in 25 years to get on with this. One tells these stories in part to mourn the fact that we wasted 30 years, which is now why we have to move so quickly, but also in part to, as good prophylaxis against the ongoing efforts at making the same kinds of endlessly deceptive statements. The fossil fuel industry, let's be clear, is engaged in an ongoing effort to maintain its business model at any cost. And the cost, as climate scientists have made fairly clear by this point, is the evaporation of our chances of dealing with global warming. So you find it at every level and in every way. And by the way, New York State and New York City have, along with many other jurisdictions in this country, mounted legal cases citing all this information. A series of New York State attorney generals have been on this case. The latest round of all of this is no longer cloaked in quite the same language of climate denial. And that's because there have been too many floods and too many wildfires and too many out of control hurricanes and so on for that to be credible anymore. You know, at a certain point, you know, you've seen record rainstorms often enough. Who are you going to believe, you know, Fox News or your own lying eyes? So the tactic has switched to kind of endless series of efforts at delay. And remember, and this is, I think, sometimes hard for people working in politics and legislation to remember. In this case, delay is just as fatal as denial, because climate change, unlike the other political issues that we deal with, is essentially a time test. If we don't get action soon, then the action we eventually get won't matter. Winning slowly on climate change is just another way of losing. The IPCC has told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030. So in the current round around the country and around the world, we're seeing two sets of claims. One is that renewable energy isn't ready to go as a replacement for fossil fuel. This isn't true. The most important set of data from the last 10 years is the fact that scientists and engineers have dropped the price of renewable energy and the batteries to store it by something like 90%. Sometime in the last few years, that cost dipped below the imaginary line of fossil fuel power production. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to generate power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That doesn't mean that we don't have difficulties and complexities figuring out how to make the grid work as smoothly as possible, on and on. But these seem manageable, far more manageable than trying to deal with the effects of runaway climate change. And the second set of disinformation is that somehow this is going to be impossible for consumers to deal with. And here we see a whole wide range of things, but let's just focus on one, because I think it's pertinent to the work going on in New York around, for instance, the recently passed ban on new gas hookups for construction. The gas industry, which is one of the biggest parts of the fossil fuel industry, has been terrified over the last couple of years, not only by the advent of deep worries about climate change, especially in regard to methane and its heat trapping capacities, and methane is just another word for natural gas, but also by the new research demonstrating the deep human health costs that come from, say, continuing to burn gas in your home. We now know that hundreds of thousands of cases of childhood asthma a year are linked to being in a household which has essentially an open fire burning in the kitchen. It shouldn't come as a huge surprise. And happily, we have affordable technology that obviates the need for it. The induction cooktop scans with the heat pump and with the electric vehicle is one of the kind of trinity of new technologies that allow us to move quickly to a different kind of world. But that has been, that's anathema to an industry that prospers by continuing to pump gas into homes. And so, as the New York Times reported, within a few days of the bans being proposed in Albany, they reported that the fossil fuel industry had spent more than $10 million hiring influencers trying to convince people that they couldn't cook without that blue flame in their kitchen or whatever it is. So my warning here is that this industry comes with a deep track record. That track record, remember, began with what's probably the most significant lie in human history, the lie that we didn't know whether climate change was real. It touched off a 30-year completely sterile debate because both sides knew the answer at the start. It's just one of them was willing to fib about it, and that lie cost us the thing that's most precious, time. That's why we're now in this position of having to move so fast, having to cram the work of energy transition into 5 or 6 years instead of 35 or 40 years. So be very, very wary for the next set of disinformation that's forever coming down the pike. I could go on at great length about all the other ways that they've played these games over the years, including pretending that they're becoming renewable energy companies. If you just watch the advertising, you'd have concluded over the last decade that Exxon was an algae company that happened to have a few oil wells on the side, you know, or just on and on and on. But I'm going to turn it over now to a more focused discussion of exactly what's going on in one state, in one country, in 1 year, in the middle of this, in the middle of the greatest drama that's ever played out on this planet.
Thanks so much, Bill. Anshul, do you want to please pick up where Bill left off? And
Sure. Good morning. I will start with thanking Senator Kruger and Senator Harkin for this opportunity. Let me share my screen. Right. My name is Anshul Gupta. I'm a senior policy analyst with New Yorkers for Clean Power, which is a statewide collaborative campaign to facilitate a rapid shift to a clean energy economy. I also volunteer with the Climate Reality Project, which is an international organization founded and led by former Vice President Al Gore. So in this presentation, I'll try to give a glimpse of the depth and the breadth of the fossil fuel industry's disinformation campaign in New York, and the breathtaking coordination among various players. The key players that I cover are the gas utilities, fossil fuel front groups, and certain business groups. I'll add the caveat that many business groups may themselves be victims of disinformation. However, there are also powerful business groups with deep ties to the fossil fuel industry. What we will not be able to cover today is the misinformation against renewable energy projects, which shouldn't be underestimated by any means, just because it's not in this presentation. The presentation will mostly be a series of images and short videos with some context and commentary. So mostly we'll let the fossil fuel industry speak for itself. Some of the utilities that seem to be most active in the disinformation space in New York include National Grid, National Fuel, and Central Hudson. And we'll also talk about two other entities funded and operated by the fossil fuel industry. So let's start with the fossil fuel front group, New Yorkers for Affordable Energy. The funders of this group include American Petroleum Institute, National Grid, National Fuel, etc. And the group's own tax filing shows that their real mission is to expand methane gas, essentially. This is a slide from one of their own internal presentations that we got a hold of, and it lays out their comprehensive strategy for their public disinformation campaign. It includes grassroots outreach, social, print, digital, broadcast media, op-eds, press coverage, generating letters to legislators, and of course, robocalls. And what they were doing was to scare people with totally inflated costs of converting existing homes to all electric, and then getting the constituents fired up to call and write to their legislators to oppose all electric new construction. Another prominent entity in the disinformation space is Smarter New York Energy. They also have a very comprehensive battle plan. Once again, this is their own internal document and shows all the ways that they are operating in. There are quite a few similarities with the previous group. Something that surprised us was the fact that the conservative think tank, the Empire Center, is funneling resources into disinformation campaigns. Other than that, this entity is funded by the propane and heating oil industries, and as a result, they have direct access to their customer base, which they can activate to generate calls or letters to legislators. These are their funders. Once again, this is a screenshot from their own presentation. So thankfully, I had put in very little effort in preparing this presentation. Most of the materials is prepared by the fossil fuel industry. So I mentioned access to their customers. This is an example of a heating oil distributor reaching out to all their customers to oppose the Climate Action Council's scoping plan. And every distributor on this list and more are doing similar customer outreach. So you can imagine that the cumulative impact of that. But fuel distributors are not the only ones. Gas utilities have access to a lot more customers. These are images from emails that were going to the customers of National Grid and Central Hudson. Clicking on the links in those emails would take you to a page with tons of disinformation about hydrogen and renewable natural gas or RNG. And in some cases, with prompts to submit a comment on the Climate Action Council's scoping plan. National Fuel went one step further. They stepped into sort of a legal gray area and used the customers' phone numbers that they have access to for an anti-electrification robocalling campaign earlier this year. And of course, they were not the only ones robocalling. This is a copy of an email from New Yorkers for Affordable Energy that went out on March 19th, in which they say, we will also be starting robocalls this week. Okay, so now we'll move beyond grassroots disinformation and look at the larger scope of the campaign. This is one example of a major disinformation fest. Here, New Yorkers for Affordable Energy, National Grid, and National Fuel joined forces to do a webinar for the Buffalo Niagara Manufacturing Alliance. I attended this, and among the highlights for me was when National Grid told a Zoom room full of industry executives with a completely straight face that the gas system can handle up to 30% blends of hydrogen without any modification, and up to 100% hydrogen if we simply swap our appliances with hydrogen burning appliances. We can't go into the technical details, but these claims are 100% false. Also, in the same webinar, New Yorkers for Affordable Energy told the audience that their robocalls were so effective that a certain assembly member reached out to them waving a white flag of surrender after just 3 calls. So not only were they keeping track of which legislative offices were succumbing to their campaigns, they also gloat about their success and make fun of the legislators behind their backs. The industry has other ways of reaching out to the business community. This event, for example, looks like a legitimate conference, but it was not. It was a shindig organized by National Grid, who invited the speakers and the guests who they wanted to influence. And it was, again, replete with hydrogen, RNG disinformation. Here's more evidence of National Grid not only duping business groups, but also handing out scripts to spread disinformation. So on July 6th last year, National Grid penned an op-ed in Crane's New York Business in which they claimed that green hydrogen is produced by separating hydrogen out of the water molecule, leaving only water vapor behind. Now, water vapor is also made of water molecules, so this is clearly wrong because once you take the hydrogen out of the H2O molecule, the remainder is oxygen. But National Grid VPs are not supposed to be scientists, so it's an honest mistake. But then on August 1st, the the executive director of the Riverhead Chamber of Commerce wrote an op-ed in Newsday, anti-climate op-ed in Newsday. And she wrote that green hydrogen is produced by separating hydrogen out of the water molecule, leaving only water vapor behind. So exactly the same mistake, also expressed in exactly the same words. She did mention in her op-ed that she learned about these supposedly low carbon fuels from National Grid. But National Grid did more than that. They were also handing out these scripts. And fast forward to September, a business leader in the capital region penned an op-ed in the Albany Times Union and wrote that green hydrogen is produced by separating hydrogen out of the water molecule, leaving only water vapor behind. So what are the odds? And there were numerous op-eds all over the state with essentially the same talking points by fossil fuel executives, chambers of commerce, and local business councils. The Business Council of New York State has a clear interest in promoting gas because the board chairperson is also the president of National Fuel. But the fact that they call her the chairman on their website is probably not disinformation, just an indication of how regressive the group is. Here's another example of fossil fuel groups spreading fear and misinformation through sessions like these for community groups. This was organized in Columbia County, where these groups are very active because they're trying to influence the Assembly's energy chair. I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch to sharing a few video clips now. So in the first clip, you will see, you'll notice part of their political strategy as they describe it themselves. So let's start it.
New York State Propane Gas Association Fall 2021 Conference.
To muster the political opposition that we need to attract moderate Democrats in places like Long Island and Westchester and Rockland County. But now, we introduce some messaging to them about the downsides to see, okay, what were the messages that were most persuasive? So we created a website, that's the base of the campaign, but then there are these digital ads. We positioned this as a tax. We called it Stop New York's $20,000 home heat tax. You see a lot of women in these. That's because the research also showed that women were much more likely to shift their position on this.
We put hundreds and hundreds of messages out there.
Our plan is for more, bigger, better. So the particular messaging themes that we know resonate most to get people's attention and get them get them to voice their opinions are the issues of affordability, reliability, particularly in their home and the electric grid and in their cars, and finally choice.
So you heard them describe their political strategy and how all the talk about affordability and reliability is a product of focus group research and has little to do with reality. So now let's see how the industry uses this messaging in a coordinated fashion. The next clip includes, the next sort of section will include clips from the Assembly's hearing on all electric buildings.
I want to focus on the issue of affordability and reliability.
To get New York to its goals that put affordability and reliability, and in some cases, hybrid systems provide more affordability and reliability. Solutions that achieve the shared goals while supporting reliability and affordability.
The All Electric Buildings Act could have serious repercussions in terms of energy reliability, resiliency, and affordability that will impair energy reliability and increased costs for consumers.
Leveraging existing asset condition projects, really with affordability, reliability in mind.
Nor can it upset energy reliability and availability and affordability. That we answer the questions related to energy reliability and affordability. How are we going to ensure that we're getting energy reliably and affordably? You know, listen to the folks that have talked about energy reliability and affordability.
Businesses care about cost, affordability, and reliability.
We're concerned about supply chain reliability of the grid and affordability so that
we want to see a more organized effort to push back on the CLCPA. We should all be gathering together to push back.
And lastly, transitioning the gas system to 100%.
So more about hydrogen and RNG from National Grid at various venues in the next clip.
Fossil free between now and 2050 with key milestones along the way. Traditional fossil-based natural gas will be increasingly displaced by renewable natural gas and green hydrogen.
Continued development of innovative technology is also required for 2040 and should include the use of hydrogen. To succeed, the energy transition must maintain reliability and affordability, as well as optimize all available resources.
The next clip shows how the industry exploited the Buffalo storms to turbocharge their fear-mongering and disinformation.
Or extensively advertising in social media. This was a post from about a month ago after the Christmas surprise. That opportunity, our social media boosted posts really enable us to jump on things that are really topical and make sure that we leverage that to get people aware. We reached 392,000 people and 37,000 of them engaged with this post. These are really big numbers and it's not unusual. We wanted to stimulate some discussion about how their heat pumps were working for heat during this period, and you can see that reached 200,000 people.
All right, we're going to start with National Grid. This is in regard to New York State, is how National Grid will.
So the last clip is National Grid presenting in a meeting of Staten Island's Community Board 2. So this not only shows how comprehensive their coverage is. They've covered business groups, community groups, local government, of course. They have a great ground game with the grassroots outreach. This clip not only shows how, of course, the comprehensive the coverage is, but it also captures all the disinformation sort of points in a single video.
Collectively reach the clean energy targets outlined in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act.
The NYSO is the New York State Independent Systems Operators. They have said, not just us as the utility company, the NYSO has expressed reliability concerns about the transition, so up to and including as soon as next year. This goes to customer choice, so this really speaks to gas bans, and to the extent that it might be practicable for you to use RNG, which is a clean burning safe, or green hydrogen, which are clean burning safe fuels that get us to the same place. Again, affordability, feasibility, reliability, and methodology are kind of the four main pillars. Heat pumps are a great technology, right? But heat pumps aren't great when you're in Buffalo and it's -2 degrees and you have, 6 feet of snow, whatever they had.
Okay, so I will now for some quick myth busting. Okay, so you heard a lot of stuff about NYSO and how the grid may not be able to handle electrification. This image shows hourly demand, electricity demand in New York State using NYSO data for the entire year of 2021. And as you can see that the demand on a grid peaks in the summer, and home electrification mostly adds to winter demand because the key additional load comes from heat pumps. The NISO reliability warnings that they were talking about, they all apply to summer peak demand. This chart from the most recent NISO Gold Book shows that the winter demand will not exceed the summer demand until 2034. So we don't have any concerns like coming next year from building electrification, at least. Cold climate heat pumps should work anywhere in New York State. Much colder Montreal's gas ban is slated to kick in just a few months, starting in January 2024. So it's now about hydrogen and RNG. Study after study, as well as failed pilots, have shown that hydrogen is not suitable for utility networks. Renewable natural gas, or RNG, is not a climate solution either, because of massive methane releases involved in the production process, which releases so much methane that a recent explosion and fire in Texas, on a Texas farm with an RNG facility, killed more than 18,000 cows. RNG is also expensive, and its supply is going to be extremely limited. So despite the impracticality, the gas utilities are desperately promoting hydrogen and RNG, as you heard. And the reason they're doing that is so that they can show a use for the gas network. This is going to be extremely costly for ratepayers, and the prices will continue to carry, and the pipes will continue to carry mostly fossil gas. The New York heat bill starts the much needed strategic downsizing of the gas system, and none of the ways the utilities, and one of the ways the utilities are sort of blocking this critical bill is through the lure of hydrogen and RNG flowing through their pipes. So with that, I will stop now so that we can move to questions.
Wow. Thank you, Anshul. That was just enormously helpful and disturbing. So let's move on. A number of questions raised by the presentations. I wanted to start by asking Bill, as you listen to Anshul lay out some of the details about the strategy and the tactics in New York State, what parallels do you see between what's happening nationally, either at the national level or in other states, and what's happening in New York State?
Well, first of all, enormous credit to Anshul for gathering all that. And it's really powerful just to see how it plays out in, meetings in Columbia County or on Staten Island or wherever it is. That's really great reporting. And would that we had more reporters who are doing kind of granular work at that level. This is exactly what's happening across the country, indeed around the world. The way to understand it is that the fossil fuel industry and all its components are stuck with a business model that requires, in essence, setting things on fire. That's what their whole business model is about. And they've built out this huge network of pipes and whatever else to transport the stuff to set on fire. And their problem is that we're now able to make full use of the large fire that the good Lord was kind enough to hang 93 million miles up in the sky. The sun delivers the energy for free every day when it rises above the horizon. So if you're the fossil fuel industry, that's the worst business model of all time. You've spent the last 100 years getting paid every month for a new increment of energy coming in. And so they have to figure out how to make it, how to slow down this transition as much as they can and keep their business going as long as they can, even in the face of those continuing steep falls in the price of renewable energy and in the price of all the technologies that make that clean electricity so valuable. So you see it on every single front. Electric vehicles are dangerous because they catch on fire, says an industry that has spent 100 years convincing us all to drive in a car above a large tank of flammable liquid. heat pumps can't keep you warm in cold weather, they say, even though the biggest installation of these technology around the world is in Finland. On and on and on. And it's, I mean, one almost feels a certain amount of pity for them, because it's a very hard argument to be continuing to make, especially against that continuing slide in the price that goes on year after year after year as we get better at this. The thing I just want to emphasize once more is that the one thing we cannot do in response to this is delay. We're out of time. That's what the physics of climate change make abundantly clear. Delay of any kind at this point is the same as climate denial, climate obstruction. And that's their tactic, is delay. They know that in some number of decades, we're going to run the world on clean energy because it's so much cheaper. But if it takes us 30 years to get there, or even 15 at this point, the world that we run on clean energy is going to be a broken world. So our job is to continue to catalyze that change. That's finally what places like the legislature have begun to do. And it's really important that we keep, to use an old hydrocarbon metaphor, keep the pedal pressed to the metal as we're doing this work. It's our only chance of getting out of this intact.
Thanks very much, Bill. So I'm going to take some questions from attendees. Excellent presentation. What are the plans to more broadly share the story of disinformation to consumers and the general public? And that's from Steve Otis. Anshul, would you want to try and take that on?
I mean, of course, we don't have the advertising budget of the fossil fuel industry to send it to the general public. The slides and the video of the presentation will be shared with everyone who registered. The slides actually have links to sort of the actual sources of the material. And many legislators themselves, they have newsletters. They can probably use that to counter the disinformation that their own constituents are getting from the fossil fuel industry. And instead of the constituents then calling and writing to the legislative officers based on the disinformation, we can sort of the legislative officers can help turn the tide by informing the constituents through the channels that they have.
Anshul, this is such a great deep dive that I hope you put it together in the most, or that someone helps you put it together in the most usable format possible. And if that happens, I'll make sure to help spread it around nationally, because this will be a great assist to people in other places fighting these same fights, as well as reminding legislators exactly who it is that's trying to lobby them and exactly on what grounds.
Absolutely, I'd love to work on that.
Would be a great story for the New Yorker, for Rolling Stone. Another question from attendees. A question about the legality of the robocalls that you mentioned. Natural gas industry and their energy and business group acolytes are starting to sound like the Fox News of climate disinformation, but more dangerous given that listeners can be passively reached with robocalls. No channel selection needed. With a good intel being shared here by Anshul, could there be a legal remedy through legislation or directly by the Attorney General or others to cease and desist? And Anshul, just linked to that, can you talk about the gray area of robocalling being done by utilities, and what the legality issues might be and what you think the remedies might be?
So absolutely. the Supreme Court has now cleared the way for states to sue the fossil fuel industry for damages resulting from the disinformation campaign. So, for example, New Yorkers for Affordable Energy have themselves claimed that they were able to successfully delay the passage of the All Electric Building Act, which means we also have now credible data to show that this delay would result in a certain number of childhood asthma cases. So this is something for the Attorney General to pursue. I'll quickly comment on the National Fuels robocalling campaign. So the response of the Public Service Commission was that as long as they were not using customer ratepayer funds, it probably was okay because this is their First Amendment right. But the problem with that is that I think PSC took a very narrow view. So National Grid, for example, relied on customer data and there are costs associated with collecting, storing, and maintaining that data. So they didn't do data collection from scratch for this robocalling campaign. And the expenses of all their data operations must be accounted towards grassroots lobbying, which is what they're using the customer data for. So I think a lot of these things will probably come out if there is a investigative hearing on these issues.
Thank you. I'll just add that one of the things that New Yorker News, along with Clam Can't Wait, has been urging is just what Anshul just mentioned, which is the possibility of hearings by either the Assembly or the Senate, or possibly jointly, on what the industry has been doing in New York State, and ideally calling representatives of the industry to testify, as well as calling outside experts like Anshul to lay out what he's been observing and what the information that he's gathered. So we hope that that's something that can be taken up by one or both houses of the legislature in the near future, because it seems like this the issue is not going away. The fossil fuel industry is not going away, and their delay tactics, even though they have lost successively, first by passage of the CLCPA in 2019, then they tried to influence the scoping plan in the last 21 and 22, and mostly fell short in influencing the scoping plan. And then, as we saw in the budget that just passed earlier this week, they opposed the All Electric Buildings Act, but it still was included in the budget. So they are losing ground, but they obviously have very deep pockets. They made record profits last year. And they're going to continue double down and triple down in their efforts to delay action. We're getting close to the top of the hour, Bill, and I know you need to leave at 5 minutes too. Any last comments you want to make before you jump off?
Just to reiterate what you just said, the only, it's not fair, but the only antidote to this is exposure and endless citizen participation. And New York's been blessed with wonderful advocates and lots of citizens who have rallied time and again, from the days when they forced a ban on fracking across the state, on and on and on. The other piece of good news is that New York has so many of the experts that really are at the forefront of this work. One of the ironies of the fossil fuel industry trying to play games with methane formulas in the last round of negotiations in Albany was that the world's literally greatest expert on methane is 100 miles down the thruway at Cornell, Bob Howarth, and he was able to step in and say, no, you just are not telling the truth. Jim Hansen did the original work about climate change on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So New York has stakes in many ways, but great New Yorkers have been telling the truth about this for a long time. And eventually that will carry the day. Our job is to make sure that eventually comes quickly enough to match the time that physics is setting for us. So on we go.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you taking the time out of I know, a very, very busy schedule to join this presentation. Anshul, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make before we wrap up?
So one of the things which I showed in my last slide was that how the fossil fuel industry is, the gas utilities particularly are using the lure of hydrogen and renewable natural gas to delay the downsizing, the strategic downsizing of the gas system. This is something that is recommended by the Climate Action Council, that it must happen. It must happen right now, and the consequences of that will not just be for the climate. There are huge cost consequences for the gas ratepayers because all the new pipes that are being laid today, they have a physical life of more than 80 years. They will not be used beyond a few decades, 20 to 30 years. And so they'll cost the ratepayers about 4 times because of the accelerated depreciation. And we must stop the expansion of the gas network and not fall into the disinformation trap laid by the fossil fuel industry. And the renewable natural gas, they're also trying to change the greenhouse gas accounting, because that's the only way they can push renewable natural gas due to its methane emissions impact.
Thanks very much. Just want to note, there was a question. This is being recorded so that it can be shared afterward. We'll be sending around to everybody who registered for the webinar. And you can feel free to share it with others. We will also be probably pulling some excerpts. Look to the Twitter feeds of Senators Krueger and Senator Harckham, who will probably either later today or possibly in the next couple of days post some excerpts. Thank you again to both of our guests. Thank you to everybody who took time out of your schedules to join as attendees for this. We hope to keep this conversation going. We'd be very, very appreciative of any feedback you could provide, so that if we do another one of these in the future, we always look to do it as well as possible. And we will stay in touch.